What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, dude. I think you guys have been loving these double I swides I've been dropping them like crazy right now, and we're doing another one, dude. This one is pretty interesting. This is a phone that, in my opinion, had so much potential. You guys are gonna hate me for saying this, especially if you're LG G3 owners. I think this phone could have been a timeless phone, could have been a phone that I would still have recommended if it wasn't for one strange, weird reason. Doctors hate them, so one way to get rich, and I'll talk about that in a second. But a word from these sponsors. Just kidding, dude. I have not done a sponsorship in so long, and I don't think I'm going to either. I don't know. But we're going to be looking at the LG G3, how it's going to hold up in 2019, I guess, how it's held up so far, and kind of looking forward, looking backwards, seeing if it's still worth it, all that other good stuff, man. And I'll tell you right now, this phone really doesn't look too dated, okay? There's still a lot of phones out there that are being released or have been released that kind of have the same type of layout that this phone had, you know? It doesn't have humongous bezels, even though they kind of increased it from the LG G2, in my opinion. It kind of gives me like Galaxy S8, S9 type of vibes on it, even though the Galaxy S8 and S9 have smaller bezels. This thing definitely kind of stood the test of time in terms of the way it looks, and I have so much respect for the G3 in that aspect. And coming from a G2, they actually increased the size quite a bit, and on top of that, this is the first time that I can remember, I mean, there's probably some stupid thing I'm probably missing out, but where a phone manufacturer actually went from a hard internal battery, internal storage, you can't remove anything, to a complete opposite, to them really actually allowing the user to remove the battery, remove the storage, add SD cards, all that stuff. And the LG G3 brought that, and that was super cool on LG's part, and I really love that. I think that's super underrated. There's not a lot of phone companies that have done that, and LG was one of them. You know, they're a humongous phone manufacturer, and I have so much respect for LG for that. And I actually have a funny story. I think I told this before, but I actually bought an LG G3 from somebody like 2, 3, probably 4 years ago, man. It was forever ago. And I paid the guy $50. Now, this thing was released in 2014, and I probably did this in, I would say 2015, probably early 2016. And the guy ripped me off. The phone ended up not being able to connect on T-Mobile, which was super stupid. And I ended up getting scammed. I contacted that guy back. I told him I was going to call the police, and he never responded back. I'm pretty sure he was using a burner phone. But yeah, how crazy is that? I got scammed. So now you guys know a little bit more about me. Now the screen is 5.5 inches. It's 1440p. This is the first LG phone that had 1440p, and this is actually one of the first phones to bring 1440p panels on their phones. Now, I'm not saying LG was the first one to do it. I'm not saying that at all, but I remember at the time in 2014 of watching a ton of reviews of the LG G3 and me being like, 1440p, I thought 1080p was like the top, but 1440p was there. And technically, I'll tell you right now, this panel, even though it's not AMOLED, even though it's not whatever, I think it's a pretty decent panel, man. The pixels per inch is 538, and I don't think this is a horrible panel at all. I think it's definitely stood the test of time. I feel like I'm going to say that a lot. Maybe the LG G3 as a whole, to sum it up, it stood the test of time, kind of. I put a little kind of at the end, but I'll definitely say that in terms of the way this phone looks, it's definitely decent. It's definitely on the better side. It's micro USB port on the bottom, headphone jack, removable back and removable battery, and removable storage also. So super crazy stuff right there. And you also have the buttons on the back. In my opinion, I really like that. I don't know I know why phones haven't started doing that universally. I think your fingers just kind of land on those spots, and it's super cool. My LG G2 had that, and I really love that. Now, in terms of software, this is the thing, okay? It started off with Android KitKat 4.4.2, and you are able to upgrade it to Android Marshmallow, which is 6.0, but as of right now, that's pretty dated. But good news for you, there's a pretty large custom ROM community behind it. You're able to root this phone, you're able to custom ROM it. Now, of course, do your research, make sure you're flashing the right custom ROMs and everything, but I've seen some Android Oreo ROMs for this thing, and on top of that, this is so crazy, I've seen some Android Pie ROMs for this thing too, man, and that's crazy. Not a lot of phones out there have a lot of custom ROMs out there for them and universally, but on top of that, having Android Pie on your phone that was released in 2014 is super cool. And the LG G3 is one of those phones that it doesn't look that outdated, it doesn't feel that outdated, kind of. I mean, it's mostly built out of plastic. It doesn't feel like a $500 phone anymore. It feels pretty much like what it costs now. But I think this phone, in terms of software, is really bad. In terms of stock, you should not keep it stock just because it's so outdated, but you should definitely custom ROM it to not only gain all those new features, but not only to improve the performance, but also the security risks as well. I mean, Android Marshmallow was released at least like 2-3 years ago, so you're going to be 2-3 years behind in software, security risks, all that stuff. So I would highly recommend you guys to custom ROM your phone if you were to get an LG G3. Now, moving on to the performance aspect, I'm going to say the specs. I hate saying the specs, but it's whatever. I think there's only one spec that matters, which is battery life, but I'll kind of hit on it, and then we'll talk about the real world performance in a second. But it has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 processor, a quad-core CPU, an Adreno 330 GPU, and 3 gigs of RAM. And this is what I'll say, dude. The overall performance, in my opinion, is pretty good and right now, okay? Now granted, I was stuck on Android Marshmallow. Really should have custom ROMmed it, but I think the performance is definitely good. I don't think it's that bad. Now, is it as good as a Galaxy S8? No, it's not. Is it as good as an iPhone XS Max? No, it's not. But when you factor in the age of this phone, the software that it's on, all those other things, the price point, I think this is a pretty decent performing phone. I think the 3 gigs of RAM really helped it out. The G2 had 2 gigs of RAM, so the extra gig really helped out in terms of the upgrade. And I don't think this is a slow phone, whether you're multitasking or whatever. Now, the screen is pretty high resolution, so sometimes you might have some glitches here and there. And I don't think Android Marshmallow did a really good job at kind of optimizing those animations for it. I think Android Nougat really helped it out and kind of smoothed it out. That's my opinion. But I think overall, in terms of, I guess, daily usage of your device, it's a pretty decent performing phone when you factor in everything. But what I will say is gaming is kind of interesting too. I think the casual games are perfectly fine. Pew Pew, Temple Run, whatever, obviously those games are going to run perfectly fine. But when you kind of take it up a notch to the heavier games, you do kind of run into some glitched frames, some skipped frames here and there, kind of choppy performance. And I think that was expected. This phone is an extremely amazing performing. And on top of that, the screen is high resolution. And I think that has a lot to do with what this phone is overall. So what I'll tell you is the overall performance of this phone is decent. I'd probably rate it, like, when I factor in everything, probably like a 6.5, 7 out of 10. But if I just took the gaming aspect of it in terms of even like the higher intensive gaming, I'd probably rate it like a 4 out of 10, man. It's really not that good. Maybe it's the Adreno 330, I don't know, but I really wish they kind of focused on the gaming aspect of this phone. The LG G4 kind of had a hard time at it too, so that's kind of what I have to say about the overall performance of this phone. But even though I kind of bashed on that, let's go ahead and move to the camera. I'm telling you right now, the camera on this device is actually pretty good still, okay? It has a 13 megapixel camera on the back. It has optical image stabilization, has laser autofocus, has a lot of cool little things, and I think the overall performance of the camera is very, very good still. I don't think there's really anything wrong with it, and coherently that kind of stands out to me. When I kind of look at what this phone's doing, it kind of reminds me of maybe like an iPhone 7 Plus, even though it's only a single sensor and all that stuff. The 7 Plus brought like the dual camera setup and all these different things, and I think the 7 Plus is still a great camera. I think the 6S Plus is still a pretty decent camera. I think the 6 is kind of weird, but the LG G3 I think is one of those phones that is kind of in that same category. Like, yes, cameras have evolved from then, but I still think the LG G3 has a pretty decent camera, and LG is kind of known for having pretty good cameras, especially around this time in 2014. Now, I think they're still kind of up there, but not as, hyped up. At this time, they were really hyped up, and I think LG kind of knocked it out of the park with this camera. You can shoot 4K videos on it at 30 frames per second, and you can shoot 1080p at up to 30 frames per second. This is kind of where it sucks at. They should increase the video resolution speeds, but it's whatever. It has a 2.1 megapixel camera, and they really dropped the ball here, man. They put a pretty decent back camera on it, then they put a horrible front-facing camera on it. Why would they do that? It's these phone manufacturers, they like take one step forward, then they take one step back, and they just end up staying in the same place. It makes no sense. So what I'll tell you is the overall phone camera, I guess, setup on this thing is probably like a 6 out of 10. If they just put a better front-facing camera on and put some higher resolution speeds that you can film with, then I would have probably upped in that to like a 7.5, but I'd probably leave it like a light 6, honestly. Now moving on to the battery life, okay? This thing on stock had a 3,000 milliamp hour battery, and I'll tell you right now, I didn't think it was that good. I think this phone kind of lacks in the battery department. I think they should have done a better job at optimizing that, but here's the thing. This thing has a removable battery, so you can easily go to replace the battery if you want to, but on top of that, you can go and get an even bigger battery you can just put inside of it, so you don't even have to just keep it on stock and just charge it every time. You can go get your own battery from Amazon or something, pop it in this thing, and you can be good. So the 3,000 milliamp hours can go up to 4,000 or 5,000, or even, I don't know what the biggest size is. I've seen maybe like 10,000, but you can do that. You have that option, which is super, super cool. And that's something you don't get on a lot of these other phones. So I'll say on stock, the battery life is probably like a 6 out of, maybe like a 5.5 out of 10. It's not that good. But having the ability to pop out your battery increases that to like up to 2 points at least. So that 5.5 goes up to 7.5 just because of that removable battery. So I know that's kind of an advantage the G3 has over these other phones, but you know what? It's my video. I can say whatever I want. Now, some other notable things to note. This thing, in a way, is kind of future-proof. Not really. I mean, you have a battery you can remove, which is super cool. You have a micro SD card slot. You can go increase the storage if you want to, so you're not just stuck with what you bought with. A micro USB on the bottom headphone jack. I really wish they kind of switched to USB-C, but they didn't even. Most companies were still using micro USB at this time, so it's whatever. Now, here's the one thing that I wanted to touch on before I ended this video. It's probably the most important thing ever. The LG G3 and many other LG phones, especially around this time, suffered from a boot looping issue. So what this means means is that if you were to buy this phone, let's say, I guess whatever, for some reason internally the LG G3 would go in boot loop and it would potentially have touch disease problems. I don't know too much about that, but I know the boot looping issue was prevalent on many LG phones. So basically people would buy this phone and it would be working perfectly fine, and then one day it would just randomly stop and you wouldn't go past that LG logo. And my LG G3 is the ones I've owned and never went through that problem. But what I will say is that my LG G2 that I owned as a main device happened. That happened to that phone, and I read about it. It's a widespread problem in many LG phones, including the G3, the G4. I don't know about the G5. I think it is the Nexus 5X. Many other LG phones suffer from this. Super annoying. It's the dumbest thing ever. And that one thing right there, in and of itself, is the one reason why I don't think the LG G3 is worth it in 2019. Now, I think it's a solid phone. If you still have it, congratulations, you made it work this far. But what I'm saying is, I don't want to recommend people a phone that, will probably just end up not working, might brick, might this, might that. And I don't want you taking photos. I don't want you having precious stuff on your LG G3 if it's going to stop working, man. That's like my worst nightmare. I can only imagine in my footsteps if I need to go access my phone and I was not able to access it because of a hardware failure. So what I'm going to say is, I would not recommend people buying the LG G3 in 2019. I know that's horrible, that's bad, but I'm not saying go get a brand new iPhone XS or get it whatever. I'm still saying there's a lot of other used phones out there around this price tag that will fill this void. So I would say, man, instead of getting LG G3, go get a Google Pixel, man. That phone's probably like $80, $70 more than this phone in the used market, probably a little bit more, but I would 100% buy that over the LG G3. There's about a 2-year difference when they were released, but it's way more than that. That phone is way more stable and solid than the LG G3 in terms of hardware. So to buy the cheapest Google Pixels, obviously go on eBay or Craigslist or wherever. Those are probably where you'll find the cheapest ones, but I'll go ahead and find the cheapest certified refurbished ones on Amazon, and I'll link them straight in the description below, so you can go and get them straight from there and you can help out the channel at the same time. So definitely check out those links in the description. They'll be the first ones down there. But that is pretty much it. I know I kind of ended it at a raw note, but someone's got to say it. If you have any questions or you agree or disagree with my opinion, leave it down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out, but more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys, and hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.